Hey everyone, welcome back to part 2. Just wanted to give quick thanks to all these people for using their footage in my video, and now for some backstory. As far back as I can recall, I've been a giant fan of roller coasters, and if you're watching this video, you likely fall into one of two categories. Either one, you understand, or two, you're in my family. Now, I was never very good at art, but in the early summer of 2002, just before my 11th birthday, I had a zoo booked back when Disney didn't quite own the world yet. Here's just a few examples of the kind of stuff I would draw when I couldn't fall asleep. My violin reminded me to go back to sleep. A coaster I drew I apparently called Bone Chiller. Looking back, I realized the first inversion on this thing would have similar effects as the theoretical euthanasia coaster, so I suppose the name I gave it was appropriate. My own recreation of the old Hershey height categories, which in a pre-internet lookup era I'm proud to say that I got to the inch. The Canyon River Rapids ride at Hershey, and if you can't tell, that was my home park growing up. Whatever the heck this is, and a frankly like 99% accurate recollection of Great Bear. Well, it's not a top 25 yet, in this same Zoog book, I found my first ever top 10 roller coasters list. Even back then, I was lucky enough to go to several fantastic parks and was anticipating a soon-to-come Cedar Point trip for the first time. I'll just point out a couple things before getting into the real video. 1. Spelling not on point. 2. I guess Wildcat wasn't so rough back then, or as a 10-year-old, I just didn't care. 3. Even though I was a hair too short at the time, I only had the Alpengeist credit before Great Bear because my parents snuck me onto it through the child swap at night, right before closing. Still one of the wildest roller coaster memories I have, and knowing my parents is still something I can't believe they did and were okay with. And finally, Millennium Force was the clear winner back then. It was a simpler time. Back when I had a clear and obvious favorite, but with age comes the ability to travel more and experience newer and often better thrill machines. And while that's a huge improvement, it does get more and more difficult to decide each year where to rank things. As is tradition, it seems, in the coaster enthusiast world, at least we don't have to limit ourselves to top 10s. We do top 25s. But seeing as I'm up to 279 credits as of the making of this video, that's approximately the top 9% of the coasters I've done. I can safely say that I have experienced many, but far from all of the top coasters in the US, and therefore I have many tough decisions to make when compiling a list like this. If you're a fellow coaster nerd, you'll notice the trend easily, but for anyone else, the coasters at the top for me almost all have frequent and often extreme airtime. The few that don't will either have some form of launch, extreme heights and speeds, or some weird combination of elements and gimmicks that make the ride beyond your typical coaster thrills. There are many ways to rank a list, but ultimately I am listing these top rides by how I feel when I hit their brake runs, so you may also notice that great pacing is one of the most important things to me. Alright, I think that's about enough preamble at this point. Let's get to the list. I hope you enjoy.
Now get ready, here we go.
Starting off the list at 25 is Millennium Force at Cedar Point, one of the earliest number ones I've ever had. This legendary ride really has stood the test of time. I feel like height and speed are slightly undervalued nowadays, and Millie has both of them in spades. While I agree that those traits don't automatically make a ride good, it counts for a lot for me. This ride's airtime isn't crazy strong, but it's enough, and the speed more than makes up for it. This is a front row ride when possible, just beware of the bugs at night. At number 24 is Kingda Ka at Six Flags Great Adventure. The rush you get on the world's tallest and second fastest coaster has never gotten old, even after dozens and dozens of rides. I wish this ride was given a better spot than tall grass and a parking lot on either side, but the view from the top is still phenomenal and the giant floater brake hill isn't talked about nearly enough. The front row is where it's at for sure for the best sense of speed and the smoothest experience. I love coaster launches, and this is the fastest one in North America, so it's no surprise how much I like it. Number 23 is Phoenix at Knoebels. This oddball of a coaster has only a drop of 72 feet and a max speed of 45 miles an hour. So how in the world can this be superior to something like Kingda Ka? Something that is more than 6.5 times as tall and nearly 3 times as fast. Well, I'll tell you. The most unsafe airtime I've ever experienced on a coaster. This relocated ride, originally built in 1947, is very smooth, has tons of airtime hills, and only a buzz bar. That's right, no seatbelt, no other restraints, just a buzz bar. It's your butt rocketing up out of your chair until your knees, and sometimes as high as your shins, contact the buzz bar. That's how far out of your seat you get ejected, then just rinse and repeat. Final few tiny hills at the end are one of the only coaster experiences that has ever made me somewhat nervous my first ride through, because I actually thought I'd fall out. I don't know how this thing is allowed to exist, but during my most recent visit, I just kept running out of the exit to wrap right back in line and do it again. Number 22 is Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England. It almost seems criminal that this isn't even in my top 20, and I still have 5 more RMCs above this thing. I have basically no complaints about this ride other than its operations. The height is small, but it still manages to carry all its momentum for a very long ejector air-filled ride. Far and away the best ride at Six Flags New England and worth the trip for this ride alone. I got 10 rides on it in 2022 and I can't wait for more in the future. Number 21 is Lightning Run at Kentucky Kingdom. Don't let its small, candy blue painted front deceive you. This ride is like if you took the pacing and intensity of an RMC Raptor clone, but used the comfortable restraints of their non-Raptor rides, made it run glass smooth, gave it a better first drop than most coasters over twice its size, and the ejector airtime filled finale to rival Magnum XL 200s. As good as Storm Chaser is, this is easily the number 1 ride at Kentucky Kingdom for me. Number 20 is Diamondback at Kings Island. This is the king of all the B&M hypers I've ever done. Like Intimidator at Carowinds, the extended train seating in the back row makes for a killer first drop, and just an insane amount of floater airtime over what seems like an illegal amount of hills. If you're lucky enough to get a ride without the rattle it can sometimes have, it really is top of its class. And if you do get a rattle, well, just consider it theming. The splashdown at the end is just icing on the cake. While this is not the case for me, for those that have this as their number 1 at Kings Island, I totally get it. Number 19 is Mystic Timbers, also at Kings Island. Mystic Timbers has the most out of control feeling and the best ride texture at the park. For its night rides, there's something fantastic about going out into the woods, staying low the whole time, and getting positively chucked out of your seat over and over again in those extremely comfortable trains. The POV of this ride might seem sped up and make you think that this wooden coaster shouldn't be able to travel and transition between elements that fast. That's really just how fast it goes. As of right now, this is my current favorite coaster built by GCI. And finally, for those that know what I'm talking about, the shed, it's fine, just let it go. And number 18 is Orion, also at Kings Island. The top 3 here really are just super strong. I could argue after whatever the most recent ride I had out of Mystic, Orion, and Diamondback, that becomes my new favorite at Kings Island. But for now, it's gonna go to Orion. Orion deserves none of the hate it gets. It's basically Candemonium blown up 150% in size. It has nearly all the same elements, just rearranged a little bit. It has a perfect first drop, all the speed of Millennium Force, all the smoothness and airtime of Candemonium, and even a little bit of lateral G's 200 feet off the ground with a speed hill that puts Makos to shame. I've ridden Orion 35 times since it opened in 2020 because it's just so darn fun. Up next is 18B. Yes, 18B. While I said that Orion, Mystic Timbers, and Diamondback kind of share my favorite ride at Kings Island, well, it wasn't untrue, but it was also incomplete. For those that watched part 1 of this video, or my video back in 2020, you'll know that I ranked the Beast at spot 80, which I maintain. However, unlike any other ride I've ever done, this ride is literally night and day different when you ride this in the dark. I took night rides into consideration with every other ride on my list, but since it makes basically every other ride slightly better, there's often not much extra to consider. But with the Beast, it's a whole other animal. Ha 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 ha. During the day, this ride is like a long and fun old school adventure through the woods. And other than that final helix, not really intense at all. Just a little janky on the sections that weren't retracked from last year. But at night, this ride is alarmingly intense and borderline jarring in the best possible way during the final double helix at the end. I've had 3 true night rides on this, and they're some of my favorite coaster memories. The legend that you might have heard of night rides on the Beast are real, and everyone that rides it at night gets into it. For example, this is my train when we pulled back into the station this past summer. That should say it all. Number 17 is the Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. Intensity, speed, weirdness, and airtime all the way. Phantom's Revenge showcases all 4 of those. Sustained 80+ mile/hour high speeds and strong positive Gs when diving into the ravine, to wrap back up the hill to experience some of the strongest ejector airtime you can on a coaster. The entire experience almost seems wrong since it's one of the smoothest rides ever built. It lulls you into a false sense of security with its smoothness and then tries to catapult you out of the park during its ejector airtime finale. This is a front row ride for sure, but you gotta try the very back at least once so you can experience that crazy pull you get over the first hill and down the second drop that's actually the largest of the ride at over 228 feet. At number 16 is the coaster that has 3 of my top 10 airtime moments all in one ride, and that's El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure. El Toro's first drop, while a bit overrated to me, is still a fantastic element, but the following 2 main Camelback hills are probably the most sustained moments of ejector airtime out there. The middle section is slightly more mild, only relatively of course, but leads up to my all-time favorite single airtime hill, the Rolling Thunder Hill. It's stupidly strong how much this hill tries to launch you into outer space, and I love it. It's never gotten old over the years either, and neither has the not talked about enough twister section that rounds out the ride. A back row ride is preferred for a better first drop, but every seat is great. And while it's suffered 2 accidents in the last 2 seasons, I'm curious what the fate of El Toro will be in the future, and hope it can ride on strong. At number 15 is Skyrush at Hershey Park. First things first, the restraints are great, just get over it, weak people. They allow for the most free feeling possible while necessarily keeping you safe from the crazy forces this ride provides. I think this ride has to have the largest delta of any ride I've ever been on, from the strongest negative G's directly into bone-crushing positive G's, and right back into the crazy negatives over and over again. Now, I go back and forth between Skyrush and El Toro as to which one is better, but they always seem to be right next to each other in my rankings and could change on the daily. They are both simultaneously totally different and yet deliver similar forces. The camelbacks on Skyrush are just as strong as El Toro's, but they cover the hill with more horizontal ejector as opposed to that yank down version that El Toro does. I prefer Skyrush's Stengle dive slightly more than El Toro's turnaround, but I have two big tiebreakers. One is that Skyrush's first drop is still my second favorite first drop of all time. And two, while I think El Toro runs a little bit more consistently amazing than Skyrush, I think Skyrush's best days just barely edge out El Toro's best days. Number 14 is Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. New for 2022, sort of. This ride was one of the new credits that I thought had a shot of pulling my number one spot. While it didn't quite go that far, it does still have a super fun swing launch layout. The speed of the launches and that backward spike are so much fun, but the best part of it all is that backward ejector airtime you get coming back off the top hat. Once you do crest the top hat, on the next approach, the 95-degree drop may not feel beyond vertical, but it's still a heck of a fall. It has lots of fun hang time, whippy transitions, and is ultra comfortable new age Intamin trains. A clear number one at Busch Gardens Williamsburg for me. To be fair, I have yet to do Dark Coaster, but I think it's safe to say I'll enjoy it, but there's no world where it beats Pantheon. Now all Busch Gardens needs is a ground up RMC, and they'll have a top 5 lineup in the world. Number 13 is Time Traveler at Silver Dollar City. Coming from a guy who's not a fan of spinning rides, this one manages to get it completely right. Not only is the controlled spinning not a bother, it actually adds to the ride unlike anything else in North America. Getting gently spun while launching and especially inverting a few times is a super fun sensation. It's just disorienting enough to be thrilling, but without being dizzying at all. And that first drop 90 degrees directly out of the station is bonkers. Any row is great, but the legendary back car lets you take it perfectly sideways. A type of airtime that is unique to this drop. And like everything else at Silver Dollar City, night rides on this in the dark woods of the Ozarks are spectacular and even a little bit spooky. While not for me, those that have this as their favorite ride at Silver Dollar City, I totally get it. At number 12 is Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point. This ride is the better version of Kingda Ka. I don't really notice the speed or height difference, but it runs smoother, has much more open and comfortable seating, which again is a huge deal to me, and actually has a cool setting over the midway with that dragster theme to pump you up. And once you're at the top, you're not just looking over some parking lot, but you see all of Lake Erie and the Sandusky Peninsula. Front row rides on this at sunset are to die for. I even had one front row ride in 2020 where the car was so close to a rollback that I dangled for several full seconds just facing straight down 420 feet on the far side of the top out until we finally crawled over. Now that was an unforgettable experience. The launch that was on this thing was my single favorite element on any coaster. I say was because now that it's closed down, I'll never get to experience it in its original form ever again. That being said, I am hugely excited to see how it's going to be rebooted for this 2024 season. Number 11 is Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. What's widely heralded as the world's most intense roller coaster has the pacing of an RMC Raptor clone, but on an enormous scale. The sustained positive G-forces on this thing have to be experienced to be believed. I've never not grayed out during that first right-hand turn. What's crazy is that as fun as this is, the 300-foot first drop is the least intense and my least favorite part of the ride. If that sounds strange to you, that should send a signal of what type of thing you're in for on this ride. My favorite parts are the rapid switchbacks from banking left and then positively snapping you back to the right. Those transitions, when you watch them, look sped up, but well, they're not. Experiencing them really is something else and has never gotten old for me. Entering the top 10 now. Only one spot above I-305 actually keeps us at King's Dominion just on the other side of the park for Twisted Timbers. This RMC hybrid reimagining of Hurler is an ejector airtime lover's dream. Like I-305, the exciting first drop in the form of a barrel roll down drop is strangely still my least favorite element of the ride. Immediately after the first turnaround, it goes into a straight up triple camelback sequence with some of the strongest ejector airtime anywhere, especially in the back right seat. If you're curious how much airtime, well, this ride sports 20 individual airtime moments. nuts. The inversions are smooth and fun, but my favorite part is that off-axis airtime cutback directly under the lift hill. It's one of my favorite airtime moments of any ride. It's such a small hill, but it looks devilish and it delivers some unreal force as all of your momentum is trying to take you out of your seat in the opposite direction the train is now switching to. It is such a blast. This and I-305 in the same park makes for one of the strongest, most intense, and most diverse top 2s on the planet. I still have trouble deciding which is the true king of King's Dominion, but I'm happy that I have trouble. Number 9 is the Voyage at Holiday World, a ride where I got not the most ideal first rides on my 2020 trip. It was a great ride, but nowhere near the perfection everyone else described. However, after a slew of allowed to remain in your seat back row dusk rides in the fall of 2022, now I fully appreciate the brilliance of this marvel of engineering. I'd say this is the longest coaster I've experienced that never lets up. It's over 100 seconds of non-stop, out-of-control wooden coaster craziness. It's not super smooth, but not really rough either. If this thing had more comfortable trains, this would be a top 5 ride for sure, maybe even number 1. I can only imagine how cool the Hollywood Night trimless night rides are. Hopefully one day. Number 8 is Maverick at Cedar Point. While Pantheon at 14 is an incredible new school Intamin launch coaster, Maverick represents the best of the old school. It's basically a mini I-305, but with an awesome launch tunnel thrown into the middle, as well as a 95-degree drop to kick things off, where unlike Pantheon, you totally feel the beyond vertical angle. It has 2 super strong airtime hills, 2 inversions, which are somehow the least intense parts of the ride, the 2 stangle dives, with the second one being especially amazing. Though the launch tunnel is still my favorite part. Throw in a great setting, diving around the water and the rocks, and you have what, depending on the day, I consider Cedar Point's best coaster. It even runs pretty smooth. If this was somehow allowed to have the new lap bar only restraints, and they put back that removed Heartline roll, this would likely be my number 1 overall. While I said I sometimes prefer Maverick as Cedar Point's best, I put Steel Vengeance, also at Cedar Point, as the higher spot. Steel Vengeance at its best is just a hair above Maverick at its best, even if Maverick is a tiny bit more consistent. They're both long rides and have a great setting, as they are right next to each other after all. But Maverick has the better first drop and the launches, but Steve has the better restraints and the significantly better inversions. Maverick's airtime is slightly more aggressive, but Steel Vengeance just has so much more of it and in such a wide variety of ways. It is touted as the coaster with more seconds of airtime than any other coaster on the planet after all. The weaving through the wooden structure in the second half especially, though, is just so darn fun. Previously, I've compared it to the final run in Return of the Jedi, and I stand by it. Unexpectedly, I actually think I prefer this in the front row rather than the back, but any seat is spectacular. At number 6 is X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I'll give credit to I-305, Skyrush, and the Raptor clones for putting up a fight as the most demonic ride I've ever experienced, but X2 is just built different and in a league of its own in this regard. Even amongst a very strong field like Orion, Skyrush, Time Traveler, Wildfire, Raging Bull, Banshee, Iron Rattler, and some other ones that I still have yet to mention, this boasts my favorite first drop on any coaster. Starting backwards, then rotating to face straight down over hypercoaster heights of 200 feet, only to flip you face forward into the ditch just as you bottom out. And that's just how the ride starts. The constant changing of directions, flips, and raven turns combined with the soundtrack and spurts of flame in your face are simply nuts. The first time I rode this is some of the hardest I've ever laughed during a roller coaster ride. You basically surrender to the world that you've already died and just laugh at it all. The ride is by no means super smooth, but your body is already so tense that it's braced for whatever impacts your legs might experience. I cannot wait to go back to Magic Mountain and experience this again. Coming in at number 5, the ride I rode more than any other in 2021 with 25 rides over a day and a half is Outlaw Run at Silver Dollar City. This ride, far and away more than any other ride that year, shattered my expectations. I knew it was an RMC and that I liked the topper track texture, so I assumed it would be great. But how great? I was not prepared for the shortened duration but all-out aggression that this thing delivers. The view from the top of the hill is second only to Wildfire in the same park. The first drop is exceptional. The setting through the woods makes you think you're going to smack into about 100 different tree branches before turning you upside down on a wooden coaster. I actually didn't even realize it was a true inversion for the first few times I rode it. Then it hits you with 2 strong, and I mean strong, ejector air hills, throws in a couple lateral airtime filled wave turns, and then another ejector pop for good measure before lining you up for an uphill double barrel roll into the brake run. And again, that double barrel roll is technically on a wooden coaster, so 3 inversions 68 miles an hour, and an 81-degree drop, all on a wooden coaster. This dethroned Mystic Timbers for me as the ideal ride smoothness and texture on a coaster. Not only that, but move over the beast at Kings Island, because as much as I gushed about it a few minutes ago, Outlaw Run is easily my favorite night ride of all time. You kinda have to experience it to understand. It is pitch black out there. I got multiple hours worth of night rides over 2 nights when I was there last October, and as good as the night rides were on Time Traveler, Wildfire, and Powder Keg, this is clearly the king of Silver Dollar City and all wooden coasters I've ever been on. Now before I continue on to number 4, it should be noted that I consider these final 4 to be in a league of their own. Unless I considered only the night rides on Outlaw Run, there is a clear line separating them from everything else. Not just elite like all the other rides in my top 25, but more of a god tier type of coaster. All 4 of the coasters to come have held my number 1 spot at some point, and I've swapped them around so many times, and could pretty safely call it a 4-way tie for first place. I tried like a dozen ways to break the tie, and couldn't figure out a satisfactory way of doing it. With all that being said, I put Universal's Velocicoaster at number 4. It already hurts my feelings putting it this low. It for sure has the best queue line and theming of the 4 though. The first half of it has developed the tiniest of rattles in its couple years of daily operations, but it's still ultra smooth, has great airtime, and sets up for what really makes the ride, the second half. The second half has that rolling launch, the top hat, and the greatest stall I've ever done. Then add in a couple snappy airtime moments before lining up the greatest inversion on planet Earth. The Mosasaurus roll. The lateral whip you get on this thing in the front row with your arms up will simply never get old. I've completed 32 laps on this now, and it's nowhere near enough yet. If you get a chance to ride this in the front row on a warm summer night, it is a dream. Coming in at number 3 is Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens, Tampa. This is my least ridden of my top 4, with only 15 rides over the last 3 trips to Busch Gardens, Tampa since its opening, but that's mostly due to a flight delay my second trip down there, and it has far and away the worst operations of the top 4. Really some of the worst operations of any ride I've been on, but it is totally worth it. This thing is about half the ride duration of Steel Vengeance, but it cranks up the intensity and pacing, and unlike Steel Vengeance, I actually feel the phenomenal first drop. The airtime may not be as bountiful as Steve's, then again, nothing is, but there's still a huge amount of moments, and they're nearly all super strong ejector, which is my favorite kind. The death roll inversion would be my favorite inversion in the world if it weren't for that aforementioned Mosasaurus roll on Velocicoaster. The wave turn under the lift hill is my favorite moment on the ride, especially if you're in the front. The ride as a whole is simply relentless and doesn't have a single dull moment on it. By the time you gracefully slam into the brakes, it's pretty clear the ride still had like 1,500 feet of track it could have comfortably traversed. This ride is an engineering masterclass. At number 2, I have Fury 325 at Carowinds. What is arguably the most well-rounded ride ever built, Fury 325 is B&M's magnum opus. A 320-foot drop, 95-mile-an-hour speeds that are smoothly maintained the entire ride, ejector airtime, lateral airtime, floater airtime, aggressive turns, ultra-comfortable seats, and all over 1.2 miles of track that cover both North and South Carolina. I have 38 rides on Fury over 4 trips to Carowinds. Buying the Fastlane Plus is worth it even if it's just for this ride. Unless I'm allowed to count X2's Raven turns, the treble clef into the Hive Dive is probably my favorite turnaround on any coaster. The first drop, while not quite as good as Orion's, is still excellent, and it's a B&M with some legit ejector airtime. The pacing feels like I threw a 5 without all the intensity or grayouts, and I have to admit this ride and my number 1 to come are the only 2 rides I can consciously recall putting my hands down and grabbing hold in a brief moment of sheer animal panic. And it's not what you probably think either. For me, it wasn't the first drop at all. No, it was both the first high bank turn and those 2 low-to-the-ground banks that head towards the treble clef. I had never in a million years thought a B&M using clamshell restraints would be allowed to give you lateral forces like that, let alone at those speeds and heights. I remember my right hand darting back down, not to the restraint, but actually to grab the back of my own seat, since it was the closest thing to my hand. It took me a couple of rides before I could anticipate with the rest of my body and learn the ride, so to speak, and trust it properly. That way I could put my hands up the whole time again. This ride is a total gem, and I'm happy to say that by coincidence, Carowinds has become my new home park this past month. Many more rides are sure to come this summer. And finally, the start of my 2023 season winner for favorite coaster is Lightning Rod at Dollywood. Never in my entire life have I ridden the same ride more in a single day. It was closed for that refurbishment on my 2020 trip, but I got 18 rides during my 2021 trip. And I would have gotten a lot more too if it weren't for thunderstorms closing the rides down for a couple hours in the evening. Now, as much as I gushed about Outlaw Run, this ride is extremely similar. But what sets it apart is the deceptively powerful uphill launch, and instead of a double barrel roll finale, it has my favorite airtime sequence in the entire coaster world, the quad down. 4 of the strongest ejector airtime moments on the planet taken cartoonishly fast, and only increasing in speed and power with each consecutive hill as you careen back down the mountainside. And like on Fury 325, the other moment I can recall being actually frightened was that first twist and shout element. It made my hands shoot back down to try to grab onto the seat as I thought I was going to get chucked straight sideways out of the car. Since the launch was supposedly slowed down slightly since when this ride was 100% wooden, I can't imagine how much more I would have enjoyed it back then, because even in its current half steel, half wood state, it's still my favorite coaster of all time. When you can give me bruises on my thighs from all the ejector airtime this thing has to offer and have me be doing nothing but smiling about it, you know RMC created something special. I didn't get a chance to go in 2022, but you can be sure I'll be heading to Dollywood again in 2023, even if it's just for this legendary roller coaster. And that concludes my rankings for the end of the 2022 year. I realize it's already nearly halfway through 2023 when I'm making this. I just wanted to do it before I start hitting lots of new credits soon, so I have something to compare to, as my opinions change from year to year. Here's the last few years of top 25s just to compare. I'll be at Six Flags, over Georgia, Fun Spot Atlanta, and back to Hershey Park for the new Wildcats Revenge, all by the end of next week. I can guess that I'll have at least 2 newcomers to the top 25 after that's all said and done, and hopefully a few other new parks by the end of the summer, which should put me over 300 credits soon. Feel free to post your own lists or comment below, and thanks again for watching.